On this episode of China Uncensored, Chinese officials say Christian symbolism has crossed the line. Oh, that's terrible. Hi, welcome to China Uncensored. I'm your host, Chris Chappell. You know, there are a lot of misconceptions about China floating around out there these days. Like, some people have come up with the idea that just because China's constitution guarantees religious freedom, people in China are guaranteed religious freedoms. I mean, where does it say that? No, religion is serious business in China. First of all, the ruling Communist Party is officially atheist, and if you want to be a member, you have to be atheist too. There are also only 5 officially recognized religions: Protestantism, Catholicism, Buddhism, Taoism, and Islam. Sorry, Jews. Now, obviously, the situation in China has improved since the days of the Cultural Revolution, when monasteries and temples were being burned and the priesthood exiled or killed. But according to this year's report by the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, the Chinese regime's suppression of Christians in 2014 is even worse than the previous year. It says Christians continue to face arrest, fines, lengthy prison sentences, and of course, the bulldozing of churches. Now, as you might imagine, Chinese officials were none too pleased with that report. They said it was full of arbitrary and unfounded criticisms of China. So let's take a look at those arbitrary criticisms. According to a report last month by China Aid, a non-profit international Christian human rights organization, there was a 150% rise in cases of persecution against Christians in the past year. Almost 3,000 Christians were detained and 1,300 sentenced. It's the worst persecution of Chinese Christians in a decade. And a lot of these cases are related to the so-called 3 rectifications and 1 demolition campaign by the Zhejiang provincial government. The city of Wenzhou in Zhejiang Province has been called the Chinese Jerusalem because so many of its residents are Christian. But local officials are trying to make their presence a lot less visual. The 3 rectifications and 1 demolition campaign is in theory geared towards removing illegal structures. But in reality, the illegal structures on the lists are all pretty much churches and temples. And by 1 demolition, they mean hundreds and hundreds of crosses and scores of churches. But who's counting? Yep. What's that, Shelley? Oh, the Commission on International Religious Freedom is counting? Okay. That number is, in fact, more than 400 last year. For example, the Zhejiang Church in Wenzhou, which took 12 years and $4.7 million in donations to build, was demolished in one night. I mean, yes, thousands of the church's members tried to stop it, but a good number of them were arrested. And the thing is, it was a state-sanctioned church that was even lauded by the local government for being a model engineering project. A deeper problem is that technically, all the land in China belongs to the Communist Party. So whenever they decide they want you off, it can lead to some pretty awkward situations. Wave after wave of churches have been demolished or have had their crosses torn down, because nothing says illegal structure like a cross on a rooftop. Though that Eye of Sauron they're building in Beijing is a beauty. And of course, as with any construction project, it's reasonable to assume that some crosses will spontaneously burst into flames. I mean, it is construction. But people, come on. The Chinese constitution guarantees religious freedom. Zhejiang officials just have a few little suggestions on how to handle the crosses. Let's see. Crosses must be placed on the facades of buildings, not above them. They must be of a color that blends into the building, not one that stands out. And they must be small, no more than 1/10 the height of the building facade. And of course, if your church's cross doesn't meet those perfectly reasonable requirements, it will be torn down. Like in my Catholic high school, when they announced that we were no longer allowed to have facial hair, and then they came into our bedrooms in the middle of the night and ripped off our beards. Now, unsurprisingly, officials have met some resistance from Christians in the regions, but they decided to take the high road. Instead of lowering themselves to the level of rationally explaining their actions, they just arrested people. I mean, arresting Christians worked out pretty well for the Romans. Why shouldn't it work for the Chinese government too? Last year, 50 people from a Protestant church in Zhejiang protested the planned removal of their church's cross. The police beat them. After that, a pastor named Huang Yizi from another state-sanctioned church gathered a group together to appeal to authorities and get an explanation for the violence. This sort of appeal to officials is quite common in China, actually. The official term for it is apparently gathering crowds together to disturb social order. Huang was sentenced to a year in prison, and the cross was torn down anyway. Now, this is not as heavy-handed as it sounds. Originally, they were planning on putting Huang in jail for 10 years, so really they're being quite lenient. So what do you think of the attacks on Christians and crosses in China? Leave your comments below and share this episode with your friends. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time. May 13th is World Falun Dafa Day, which is apparently a thing. More than 8,000 Falun Gong practitioners from around the world made their way to New York City last week to mark the occasion. Something you may not know about the Chinese Communist Party is that they actually have a propaganda department. That's not me making a swipe at them, it's actually called the Central Propaganda Department.